Hi, I'm Eric, and this is Going Deep, a show where I talk to actors, writers, musicians, filmmakers, creatives of all kinds to learn more about them and their craft. And in this episode, I talk to illustrator and animator Max Farinato. He talks about being largely self-taught before taking classes, his new comic, which he is making completely on his own and will be releasing soon. He also shares in-depth information on the animation process, his own creative process, where Max sees current animation, and balancing life, work, and art. So, to hear all of that and more, check out this episode. Alright, well Max, thanks for coming out here to do this. I'm glad we are finally able to talk. It's cool to talk to an animator. I haven't had an animator on yet.
Thank you.
Now let's get down to the real meat and potatoes.
Yes.
Your hair.
Yeah.
Is a wig? Well, Max, I like to ask this to people just to kind of get a sense, but was art valued in your house growing up?
Yeah, I would say so. I grew up, I was very lucky. My parents, I think were both they're both very level-headed. I didn't really grow up with a lot of religion at all. It was more of a science household, but my mom was an artist. And so I, watched her paint sometimes, but I always liked drawing since I was a kid, and they always encouraged it, and they never said it was something I shouldn't do. So yeah, it was therapeutic for me for sure. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And did you always know you wanted to continue drawing, animation, illustration, like go into those two more?
Oh, like from a young age?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Not really. I did it when I was a kid. I remember I would draw in class sometimes, and I remember getting called out maybe once or twice. For the most part, I did relatively well in school, but I didn't consider art until, I would say, end of high school. But when I went into undergraduate, I thought, well, I like psychology. I'll go and get into psychology. Decided after a year that it's like, this is too much reading for me. As much as I appreciate this topic, it's probably not going to work out. So I changed my major to studio arts, and then I learned what I learned from the classes that they had. I went to Fairfield University, so that is, I think at the time I thought it was a good idea to go there because it was close by. I could go home on the weekends, go to a job, but I didn't know when I was a freshman what I really wanted to do. And so art sort of came in my sophomore year. But Fairfield University is a business and nursing school, so you can kind of guess maybe where the funding is at when it comes to that. So I did learn some things. I made some, connections, and worked with a group of people that I think it was encouraging. It was encouraging. I met some friends there who were also in film, and I thought at a certain point though, I was like, all right, I'm not getting the resources for my major here, so I'm just going to self-teach. And at the time, YouTube was actually this was around a time when YouTube really didn't have as many tutorials on how to learn. So I had a family friend who had, do you know what Linda is? Have you ever heard of Linda?
No.
So it's I think there's still
Maya.
Oh, okay.
Which is weird how if Linda's what it is, then it's weird how there are two apps named after women.
Right. So it's not Maya. But Linda.
What is Linda? Tell me about Linda.
Well, let me tell you about Linda. So Linda is a lot like Udemy or a lot of these online schools where you can pay for individual courses and very specific topics. Okay. I got some resources from there on how to learn Photoshop, and honestly, it was a lot of trial by error. And so I was learning how to draw through there. I had a tablet, and I was just kind of going, and I realized that I really liked this, and I could even make animations in Photoshop, which was something that a lot of people didn't know, and I don't think still know.
Yeah, you can also edit video in Photoshop, which I wouldn't recommend.
Right. So
because I had to do that for a while.
That is, again, it's funny you mentioned that, because well after I graduated from undergraduate, this was around the time, I want to say year or two into the pandemic, I took a course at SVA, which was I think it was called it was like called All in One or All Together, and so we were learning how to animate, basic fundamentals, and then how to use Photoshop to animate, but then also how to use After Effects. And I had never used After Effects before. I did enjoy it, but it was one of those things where after the course I used it a couple times, including one production that actually I still haven't seen yet, but I completely forgot how to use it.
Was psychology kind of what you were thinking of going into, and then once you were like, maybe it's not for me, art was kind of like, oh, I always liked that, let me try to focus in on that? Or was there something else that was like brought you back to art?
No, it was basically that, I would say. I think at the time I didn't even know what kind of art I really wanted to do. I knew I liked cartoons and I liked animation, and I always loved how, just you can draw any expression with just a pencil, and then you can sort of work it out from there. And I think that process of going from one keyframe, I don't know how much animation knowledge. Have you done a lot of animation yourself?
No, I took one class in high school on 3D animation, which is when I learned Maya, but like a keyframe, I don't think I really know what that means. Like, I've just heard it so much where I can guess it's like the main frame, and then like the in-betweens are, like a smile is the keyframe, but then to get to the smile is all the like in-betweens.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. So yeah, basically it's so you have your most expressive poses in your keyframes, and you're working from one to the other. There's also another term called extremes, which is actually, sometimes they get used interchangeably, but depending on who you talk to, that can be different. So like one extreme might be from the beginning to the middle and the end, and those might be your extremes. And then the keyframes are sort of the main poses between the extremes, and then your in-betweens are in between the keyframes. I may be getting that wrong, but that's at least from what I remember my teacher told me.
And teachers are always right, guys. Especially art teachers. We never learn that they're wrong.
They're never wrong, ever.
That actually brings me to a question I did have was, from going from, I assume being self-taught a lot was mostly like physical, pencil, pen, paper. Was there a big learning curve when you started learning animation on digitally?
Not really. I mean, well, the main learning curve was just knowing where all the tools were and what the shortcuts were, and I think that is always going to take time no matter who you are. But I definitely, I get, depending on the tool set, like going from one drawing program to another, you get a sort of paralysis when you start, because you're just like, why isn't the thing working exactly like the same program I was using? Well, not the same program, but the other program I was using before. So you're constantly like retraining yourself, but you start slow and then you get back into it. And like I'm still using Photoshop now, but given how things are going with Adobe, I'm trying to look for reasons to get out of there, because they're expensive and there are a lot of other options out there that are free, that might offer the same amount of options, maybe not everything, but so it gets easier to learn all these tools, because there are certain rules that I think everybody fundamentally says, like, no, this shortcut is always this key. We don't want to confuse people. But if you use something like Clip Studio, which was formerly called Manga Studio, I think, it's a very good program. I recommend it to anybody who's like looking to draw digitally. But there's some shortcuts that are just like, this, like, B was always the key for brush, but now it's P, which is typically pen in Photoshop. And it's small stuff that doesn't really matter too much. You get used to it, but So learning all this has been really cool. I actually took some courses after college, because undergraduate, Fairfield University has this huge core curriculum program compared to a lot of other schools. So you're constantly having to take courses that really you don't want to take, but you have to for your degree. So it wasn't until after I graduated from there that I went back to my community college and I started taking courses that I wanted to take, and I felt like, oh, cool, I'm actually like learning the stuff I want to learn. Like this is good.
Yeah.
I enjoy school now.
How about that?
How about that? How about liking school? That's awesome.
So you mentioned to me that you wanted to do a comic because you would have total control and it would be something where you could do every aspect of. And I wanted to talk more about that,
Yes.
but I wanted to say first, can you describe your comic, like pitch it, I guess? Or
Sure. It is a fantasy comic that involves little creatures going through the woods towards this red light. You don't know what the red light is, but there is sort of a ticking clock element with, the earth around them kind of, sort of rotting beneath. So they're trying to find a solution towards fixing that. But there's actually like a lot of elements about it that I really wanted it to be very visual. I'm not the biggest comic reader, but I always appreciated that there's like you were saying, a level of control that one can have over it. And sure, there are comics done by teams, but I'm going at it by myself in every aspect. Aside from consulting with some people saying like, hey, what do you think of this? It's all me, and it's been a long run.
Is it gonna have multiple issues, or is it like a graphic
It's
novel?
gonna be multiple issues, and
Okay.
there is an ending in mind, so it's not going to last forever. But I do have ideas about how I want to continue it after. So I'd like to keep the story as condensed as possible, but the process of making it has been very interesting because there are resources everywhere when it comes to like how to make anything, and when it comes to art, as we know, it's highly subjective on how you should do anything.
Yeah.
So I went about writing this story. I don't know about you. I have a question for you. When it comes to creating, do you feel like you have everything you want to know right off the bat when it comes to creating something, or do you just kind of take it as I've got an idea, let's roll with it and go naturally with it?
Yeah, more so that I try not to talk too much about myself because you're the guest, but I'll this is somewhat relevant. Is that I made this short, or I wrote it, called Louie and Me, and we tried doing some crowdfunding and it didn't get enough money. But anyway, I don't talk about it. Don't bring it up. But why would he bring that up? Just to humiliate me. So I wrote it like a while ago, and just yesterday on the car ride home, I was like thinking of adding some like scenes or like some dialogue and stuff. But no, I'll usually think of like a scene or a situation, and then just try to like expand on it, and then try to create like more scenes that go with it, or like try to add things about characters and try to like make it like fit within like, it's two people like walking down the street and then they say this funny line, and it's like, well, that's just two people saying like two lines. I'm like, well, what, like,
why are they saying these lines, right?
And then like what happens before and after.
See, right. So the thing with this comic is that I have these ideas, but I'm just desperately trying to search for a why. And it could be for just a fun, adventurous reason. It could be for a very spiritual reason. I'd like to have a nice blend that doesn't feel overbearing and kind of flows really well. So a lot of writing these characters, like the first time I ever drew the main character was 10 years ago. I was working as a bank teller, and there were these sheets of, I don't know what they were, like checking slips. I forgot exactly what they were, but I still have them, and I scanned them into my computer. I was like, I kind of like the way I drew this character. Let me keep rolling with it. But for the longest time, I had no idea what kind of personality he had, even up to the point where, even now, there are parts of his personality that I don't feel like are fleshed out to the degree where I can say, I know exactly what he would do in this situation.
Yeah.
I have other characters where I think I know what they would do, but basically, this whole process has been like, when we all look at what media has come out and what we enjoy, it's already in this like crystallized state, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think I don't know if other people feel this way, but when do most people, I ask, do most people think that these ideas were already solidified prior to production of this?
It always seems that way.
It always
as
seems
the
that way.
outsider, where you're like, everything worked, so they just
Right.
had it all.
They
But
had
then
it all. They had a lightning bolt.
and I've
strike.
seen
It's like,
things where you are like, was this written? Did someone write one script, put it away, and then immediately write the next one, and then they had no through line? So then when they came to the end of this episode where they're like, oh, it'd be so cool if this happened, and then someone's like, but that doesn't make sense, and they're like, oh, well, okay, so in the next episode we'll say, oh, just kidding, that didn't happen. It's like, why not just change the second episode? It's like, no, because I just wrote it, it's done.
Right.
I've seen both where it seems clear when you're like, nobody thought about this,
No.
and then to not sound super lame, when it does all come together, you're like, oh, this is like, man, this is brilliant.
Oh, I know. No, it is wild, and it's wild when that actually happens, because if you think about it, like, going from episode to episode, or even when you hear about how, something like, and I don't know how true this is, but the most recent Star Wars trilogy, it sounded like they didn't have a plan from movie to movie.
Yeah, I think they did officially say, like, no, we didn't.
That's insane,
Yeah.
because it shows that no matter what level, you could be this titan of the industry, and you could go in and just say, like, just churn something out. Like,
we'll fix it in post.
Fix it in post, and I don't know if that's just.
Yeah.
I obviously I'm sure there are so many layers to that, from a bureaucratic level to a creative level, where you just don't even know why they want to make this thing, but as far as the creative care put into it, I'm sure there were lots of scripts that were thrown around, some maybe better than what they had gone through with. So I think many of the years that I was working on this comic, I was beating myself up over just trying to get everything right before making anything. And then I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to just pick some of the best ideas that I have, and I'm going to try and figure out a way to have this in a form that at least seems engaging. And then whatever happens next, at the very least I know that it's like, well, like you were saying, well, that episode came out, right? This issue already came out, so there's nothing I can do about this or that, and I might as well just try and be creative within the limitations that I'm currently set with. And that is actually probably one of the most freeing aspects of it, is that when you're making this stuff, it's sort of like, oh God, I may not I don't know if I'm gonna like this decision down the line, but it doesn't matter. Let's see what we can do with it. And so I think that willingness to be flexible with what you have has been probably the most interesting part of this, and freeing.
I know a lot of writers, and even musicians, for like albums, especially more like conceptual ones, they say that they think of the ending first and then sort of like write to get there. I don't necessarily do that. I think, like we were saying, we build upon things and then say, like, well, this ending is either funny or satisfying or sad or however, like whatever works within the thing we're making. But
totally.
And I know you said that that you have an ending in mind. How like soon into the developing process did you think of an ending?
I thought about it pretty soon, like pretty almost immediately. But the reasons but it's weird. It's like I have the setting, I have who the players are, the main players are in that scene, I have where it is. What ends up happening and why it happens is still a little in flux.
Oh, okay.
But
it's good to have that, I think, especially like I haven't done a TV show or like really a long running series. I have a TV show in mind and stuff, but like it's good to then have that through line a little bit of like it can change, but probably here.
Yeah, exactly.
And this will happen, but like.
And you're influencing yourself, like with that ending in mind. I think like one of the worst, well, it's not the worst thing, but it is the problem with, being in a chaotic state where nothing has form at all. It's sort of like, you can do anything you want, but do you have control over it, or are you initiating a direction or control? And that's the scariest part. And so as it's like, you're taking one little baby step at a time. And it took me so long and I'm sure a lot of other people out there who are creatives feel this way. You know, you beat yourself up over how many steps you've taken. It's like, no, all that matters is you took a step, and then you can take the next, and then the next, and you have to like blind yourself in a funny way to what the future holds. And it's so it's been a way to discipline myself, and also as I've been inking this first issue, and actually the first issue is almost done. I know, I'm excited too. I'm laying down halftones now, which for those of you out there who don't know what those are, if you've ever read a comic, those little dots you see when it comes to like shading, those are halftones. And the software I'm using right now has a halftone tool, so I'm laying that down. I've never done that before, so I've gone over one page multiple times to see what kind of balance works. So it's but you know, the level of detail I put into it, I knew at a certain point I thought I wouldn't be satisfied if this didn't look this way, but then you set the precedent for yourself of like, well, now everything has to kind of look this way, and you're like, oh, come on, man. Yeah, like, oh my god. Yeah. It's like I better at a certain point, you know, have some funding at some point so I can do this full time, because that would be the ultimate dream, is for that to happen.
But I feel like people don't understand fully, and I know I don't, like how much work goes into an animation or a comic book.
It's staggering.
And I feel like it's weird how people still, maybe they don't, I don't know. I feel like there's still that like, oh yeah, animation's like for kids.
Yeah.
But there's like so much work where people might think it's easy because they say, oh, that's just a little kid show. But it's like, if you look at the credits for even like SpongeBob or like
they're
kids
large.
shows on they're crazy,
and they all had to coordinate together to make sure that this thing is paced perfectly, it's timed perfectly, that there's enough room for ads. You know, it's all this unbelievable balance that it's like you can show the process, and I think you and I have both seen, you know, behind the scenes videos of like how something's made, but that the it's like you can show that exterior, or rather the exterior of the interior a little bit, but the process of actually doing it.
Oh, like someone will be like, this is our storyboard, but nobody films the person drawing.
Right.
20 storyboards. It's just like, this is the final product.
Exactly.
Is that kind of what you meant? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just the overall, like, you know, back and forth between people when it comes to like even like what direction should we take this in, and that's something, I mean, like, as much as I say I like having control over this, I do like to collaborate, because hey, if that means like we can make something at all, and it means I don't have to think about everything at all times. Obviously, you know, I want to make sure I'm coordinating with my partner or partners on a project, but you know, that would probably be less stressful.
Yeah.
So no, I think like animation is really crazy, and it is an insane process, and just like most other artwork, it almost it doesn't get appreciated, and it is hard to get people to understand how to appreciate it at all, because they see that crystallized state and it's magic to them. And you know, even the way we price out this these like all media, you know, if you're a big company, you're putting your product out there for a fraction of, if I were to put this out by myself, I'd be charging so much more for it. But that scares a lot of people away, because they're just like, oh my gosh, this is expensive. I had one, it was an illustration commission, and it was like, I severely undercharged. And, you know, it was for somebody who had a full-time job, but, you know, they were in their, I want to say their early 20s, and when I told them how much it was something like, it wasn't even $100 for a commission. And they're like, oh, this seems really expensive. And I'm like, well, it's like, and you hate to have this conversation with them all the time. You get what you pay for, but it's like I think we should be teaching not just media literacy to people, but also media construction literacy, and like you know, we should make sure these people don't take things for granted that are made by people.
We talked about very, very briefly once, but like, where do you think the current, like, where do you see current animation and sort of where it's going and the state of it? I
Oh
guess.
God, I wish I felt like I was more of an authority on this. I just know that I've watched a lot of like trends. I'm a lot of trends that I think are interesting, but I'm not a fan of stylistically.
What are some of the ones you've seen recently?
It's like, oh God, like pull up my like Santa Claus scroll. I think that the the ease of use of tools now is awesome.
Mhm.
I think that's is great. It's so like I can go on my computer, I can make a cartoon by myself, I can record the audio myself. That's the best part. Period. The like what, and obviously there are things that I could say that I maybe romanticize, but I don't want to say I romanticize it. But I just think there are certain things that we clearly have lost from traditional animation because a lot of traditional animation. I rewatched The Secret of Nim last weekend. Did you ever watch that as a kid?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. I don't think anyway.
Did you ever see Land Before Time?
Yeah.
So same animator.
Oh, okay.
So that's Don Bluth. He's
Oh, yeah.
ex Disney animator. He worked on Snow White. Still alive right now.
Really?
Yes.
That's wild.
I know.
Snow White's from the 30s, right?
Oh wait.
Or is it 20s?
You know what? I may be wrong. It wasn't Snow White. It was Sleeping Beauty. He must have worked on Sleeping Beauty.
Oh.
Regardless, though,
That's
Still.
like 40? 50s?
He's very old.
He's 120. He's the oldest man alive.
Yeah, I think he's
Wow.
in his like mid to late 80s right now, and he's still teaching, like sort of giving feedback to up and coming animators.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, no,
That's awesome.
He has like the Don Bluth School or something like that. But I always appreciated his work. There was like an odd like. I don't know how to put this, but an odd creepiness to some of the way he would do things. But it's so him, and it's so unbelievably detailed in ways that you just straight up cannot get now, which is really funny given that everybody has access to these tools, but obviously that comes more down to budgetary concerns and how much money somebody wants to put into a film. But nowadays, I mean, you see different styles popping up everywhere. I still am not the biggest fan of 3D animation when it comes to acting as sort of replacement for 2D. I think both should exist. But you start to see some examples of people now experimenting stylistically in 3D, which is really cool. There was this one film, I don't know if it was a Netflix release, but it was called Krampus. Or no.
Oh, yeah.
Not Krampus. Krampus is a horror movie.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm thinking. So what? Wait,
Klaus. Klaus is the name.
Okay.
So what they did was I think they're a European animation studio, and they modeled everything in 3D, but they made their own filter to make it look 2D. No, it's the opposite. I'm sorry, I'm flipping this around.
Mm-hmm.
They hand drew everything, made a shader to give it 3D lighting, but it's on 2D, and it's like amazing looking. And so like seeing things sort of branch out is also really cool. But I definitely see, it's always going to come down to money and like what somebody wants, but there are certain very nuanced aspects of animation that I just don't see anymore, and I miss them, and I wish we would bring them back. How certain characters move, the way we dictate action, and I realize that a lot of my problem is more down to like storyboarding action and how certain action is framed. Like a lot of things, I don't know if this is just a post Star Wars Episode 1 issue that I have, because now a lot of kids who grew up with that, I don't know if they saw that as this is how we animate action now.
Oh, okay.
It's sort of super highly choreographed, not very messy. I mean, all this is choreographed, but there's a lot of everybody's dancing practically, but nobody's like struggling in action, or nobody's like tripping over themselves. It feels very whimsical.
With like, it's tough to try to verbally say something
it
that's
is.
visual, but like
It is.
when you say action, do you mean like a fight scene or like just any kind of like movement?
I'd say fight scenes mostly.
Oh, okay.
I think anime also has a big influence on that too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of and I used to love anime. I don't as much anymore, but there are some examples that I think are still awesome to watch. But there's a lot of anime-ish action now. I mean, you even saw in the new Superman, they even stylized these characters to look a little bit more anime.
Yeah.
And, this has been a thing forever. I mean, basically, animation in Japan was inspired by Disney, and then we kind of go back and forth and
But you still like House of Beck, right? Just because you don't.
Yeah, just love House of Beck. Yeah,
but you still like that one.
I just still love House of Beck. But there's this way that we shoot, and I think it's even in movies now too, where you see this constant moving camera.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm kind of sick of that. I like a nice locked down frame. A little camera movement is totally fine, but I think we abuse the camera movement to feel like we're showing an action scene in as dynamic a way as possible.
Yeah.
But it's not.
But I feel sick now.
I feel sick now, and I don't know what emotion I'm supposed to get.
Mm-hmm.
What you're trying to convey to me. So really, my issue with animation is more of a filmmaking issue, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is a what kind of feeling do you want me to get from this? Who's supposed to be overwhelming whom? Because as far as I see, a lot of times I'm like, nobody's getting really hurt, or I don't feel any stakes in people fighting each other anymore. But that's not to say that there aren't examples now, but they're just few and far between.
Mm-hmm. What are some things now that I guess are either visually interesting, or you just find doing interesting things within animation?
Within animation. Dude, I'm gonna sound like an old curmudgeon. But I'm trying to think about stuff that I've seen that I've really liked. I think going back to the whole thing about 3D now getting to be stylized and a little more expressive, almost bringing it back to the rules of what you could do in 2D animation. I think that's great. I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But we see a lot of tween animation more so now than ever. And it's been around for a while, ever since Adobe Flash or when it was Macromedia Flash. But it's a very cost-effective way to do animation. It is, you basically are rigging a puppet of 2D slices, and so if you ever see an animation where it looks like that body part didn't change its form at all, but now it's moved up here. They interpolated or let the computer sort of animate, the motion from one keyframe to another.
Oh, is that almost like Archer style?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
It's funny because I like Archer
a
lot, and I actually like the way that show looks. I think it's funny.
It works for them, though.
It works for
if
them.
everyone did it, and maybe they do, I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
But if everyone did it, you'd be like, it's gross.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the thing is I think it works very well depending on the tone.
Gotcha.
It's not a if I've made it sound like I think it is a creatively devoid tool, I don't think that at all. But I think that it is useful in very wow. It's useful. Situations, thank you. It's very situational.
Yeah.
So, something like Archer or their prior show that they did with that called Frisky Dingo, they were using that. Metalocalypse, if you haven't seen Metalocalypse, please watch Metalocalypse. They use a bit of that too, but it's very useful in a comedy. And I'm just realizing this now in this conversation. I think it's very good for comedy because it looks kind of cheap.
Yeah.
I think that almost helps elevate the comedy of it, of whatever they're doing. But seeing there are people out there who I think really still love a hand-drawn look. So that is definitely resonating with certain studios, and it's good to see that come up. I think where we've gotten to this point where realistic 3D is sort of plateauing, and that it's everywhere now. You can't escape it, but it's not impressive anymore. If you were somebody who watched 3D animation back in the 80s and 90s, it's very rudimentary, and it actually looks cool because of that, because it does look like this very uncanny thing.
Mm-hmm.
But now, everything that uses CG, it's like it looks real. Like, okay, and what? So seeing more stylized animation now is very uplifting for sure.
I want to ask you a little bit earlier, because we talked about how like you've been on some teams and had worked now solo on this comic. What are some other jobs that you have had? I know you mentioned, Teller, you worked for a newspaper.
Yeah, I worked as a graphic designer for a local newspaper. I worked at a medical office. I've worked at Hallmark Cards.
Drawing cards?
No, just selling them.
Oh, okay. So I'm like, whoa!
That was my weekend job when I was at college.
Mm-hmm.
But I also worked at, I worked at a graphic design place for a year, and our job, well, at least my job, was to retouch artwork so it could be reprinted on canvas to sell at places like Bed Bath & Beyond. Like that wall art that you could buy that's like already pre-made or pre-painted. Yeah. So basically what that is
you just do like touch-ups for that?
Yeah, so I would have to... That's funny. So actually, this is the part of this job was me retouching stuff, so like you would basically clone the edges of art and then have it so they would fold over the canvas. So you'd have your main image, but then to blend it perfectly over, you basically like... you mirror the edges over, and then it sort of folds over. So my job was to basically edit that and then also touch up the color, which sucks because I'm red-green colorblind. So there are times where I'm just like, help, I need help on this. But they're not gonna fire a disabled person after they've already hired fired them.
If they knew that going in, then yeah.
Exactly. If they knew that, then probably not. So I did that, and that was a year, and then the company went under. And it was the same with the newspaper. The newspaper ended up getting bought by Hearst Media, and then they fired everybody, kept a couple writers, and they said, "You want to come back for like a 6-month stint at reduced pay?" I'm like, "Oh,
boy, do I!
Boy, do I! Yes, please, Daddy. Yes, thank you."
I've been waiting.
Thanks, Daddy Hearst. Yeah. So I said no to that, and I decided to freelance for a bit, and I did a couple. I tried to do commissions, but I never liked doing commissions. But I got on a team doing a game. No one on the team was getting paid to do this like 2D platformer game. We did show it at PAX East actually in 2015.
Cool.
But it was one of those things where, hey, everybody was nice, everybody I worked with, great. If you're watching this, hello. I haven't seen you all in years, or rather heard from you guys. But we...
damn.
Shade's
been thrown.
I know. but we after that, like, I couldn't work on it for too long. I worked on it for a year, and then I was like, hey, I got to get another job.
It's a long time, though.
It is a long time, yeah. And so, it's been all over the place. I think a lot of my work has been not art related, but only because I'm unfortunately... I wish I was the type of person that was just like, fuck it, man, I'm going to just do it. But I'm like, no, I want financial security.
Yeah.
But I also want to be an artist. I'm like, that doesn't go hand in hand.
I can't really draw on a tablet if I can't afford my electricity bill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's tough.
Exactly. So it's been a lot of balancing, work balance. So now I'm getting up early in the morning. I used to be such a night owl, and I kind of have been the last few weeks, but I've been consistently trying to get up at like 5:30, 6 in the morning, get my art done before going to work. Just do it bit by bit. It's like that, going back to the whole like, hey, one step at a time. You're all good. Yeah. You're all good. And just for any creatives out there, don't worry about feeling like you have to be somewhere now. Like, this is a journey. Like, unless you're financially dependent on it, take it at your own pace. Teach yourself a little bit time after time, and just get better in the way you want to get better at it.
I wonder if it's different for an animator, because I feel like filmmakers, you can be like, oh, that's their style. And I feel like if you're a writer, director, you sort of just like write to match your style.
Mm-hmm.
But with animators, like I've seen your work on your website where it's like really different. I think like everything on there is like, at least to me as the viewer,
Yeah.
maybe it isn't, but maybe it's just a shading on something. I'm like, that looks like a different art style. But like, I guess what I was wondering is like, yeah, like what is your style, if you could explain it, and then also like, do you approach something thinking, oh, I'm gonna make it look this way because it matches, like I'm gonna make something ugly or like hyper realistic because it matches like the thing I want to make, or
Sure, yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah, because actually a lot of the artwork on my website, especially in my animation section, are really from when I was experimenting in class. It was learning tools, and I was like, oh, I actually kind of like how this came out, so I'm gonna just put this in my portfolio. But I'd say my style is definitely leans more towards hand drawn, like inked lines, solid colors, maybe one or two tones for shading, but keeping it simple but dynamic enough where it's sort of like, oh, I don't like I like detail, but I think sometimes things can be a little too overly detailed. And this was like an issue I had with, not all, but a lot of anime where you have these characters that have these bombastic outfits that I don't think thematically make sense at all. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting from this. But I think, I don't know if this is from hearsay that I heard years ago, but I think a lot of characters now are designed for the sole purpose of making sure that people can cosplay them.
Really?
And that
with anime specific?
With anime specifically,
oh, okay.
And even like games, but yeah, like honestly, anime specifically, like you don't see in anime, you don't really see the biggest diversity when it comes to body form, and that's not just saying like human body form, but also just like little gremlins or shit like that. It's a lot of stuff that's like, oh, that person can cosplay that. Don't worry, we already have the materials here. And it honestly,
interesting.
For animation, a lot of money isn't made off of the animation, it's made off of the merchandising.
Sure.
So, you have somebody going out there and you have them cosplaying, and cosplaying itself is already business in of itself.
Yeah.
That's free advertising for your thing. And so, like, you get somebody looking at it, it's like, what's that from? It's like, oh, now they know about this product that you can watch, and then buy more merch for that product. So it's but yeah, anyway, so back to my style. I think my style, like I have artists that I really appreciate, but I don't know what my style is. It's really an amalgamation of like a lot of stuff that I grew up watching or watch now.
What are some examples, so in case somebody hasn't seen your art but sees this, they can be like, oh, it's something like...
Yeah, honestly, go back and look at, like, I'm going to throw out a few things. 90s Capcom art, very hyper-expressive, just like, they're going at these wild angles with... It's like they're trying to animate this still frame of a character as much as they can. I can send you a few examples.
Sure.
But then also like look at my favorite artist. His name is Yoshitaka Amano. He has a very wispy, watercolory style. Like it's just very dreamlike. So very different. And then on top of that, I really liked stop motion animation growing up, and there was a game called The Neverhood that I really liked to play, and that was made with entirely like clay and clay models and sets. It was a PC point click game, but they had this very expressive like simplicity where everything was a little off kilter, but it wasn't hyper detailed. But it had. I think my style is show just enough to convey something to keep that image burned in your brain. Like, I remember what that looks like. Not because you had a lot of detail, but you had just the right amount of detail.
Because it's iconic.
It's iconic.
You're saying everything you make is iconic.
I'm trying to be iconic.
Gotcha.
But yeah, no, I think there's time for complexity, and then there's time for simplicity, and I think both should be looked at when creating something and saying, like, does this fit? Does this fit what I'm trying to show here? Don't just throw everything in for the sake of saying we have everything. It's just balance. That's all. My own weird type of balance.
My last question to close things out is, what's something you know about drawing or animation that would have been helpful if you knew that when you first started?
I know. Literally drawing as rough as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I think when you grow up and you're like, I want to draw something, you like draw like really hard, like you like draw a line very hard, and like that's my final line, right? Drawing very wispy and light so you can erase it later, but it becomes your bounding box for everything that you want. God, lifesaver. Because then you're getting it on the paper very quick, and you're like, all right, yeah, okay, now next thing. And you can almost judge from those blobs that you're laying down, sort of like, does that fit? Like, yeah, okay. Then you...
Easier to fix later, too, I bet.
Absolutely.
Because it's not as hard or final.
Exactly. And it goes back to the whole thing where it's sort of like, oh, you're creating boundaries for yourself. So you're like, oh, you're not overloaded by the idea of like, oh, damn, I hope this looks good when it connects later. It's like, no, you'll probably have a better idea that's like, no, that will work when it's done.
I feel like that also goes back into what we were saying about seeing the final thing where everything works. And that looks like magic, where you're like, I just want to draw, like, the end result. But I don't know how to, or I'm not willing to do the million steps to get to that. I'm just going to draw it.
That's exactly it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this, man.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
You got anything to plug? I normally do this in post.
Sure. I've got, and I'll give you these links later. I'm actually getting off of Facebook. I'm getting off of Instagram.
Say it into the camera. Say it into that camera.
I'm getting off of all of Meta and probably Twitter eventually too. I'm on Cara now. CARA. They are a anti-AI. It's sort of like, hey, it's basically, until AI gets regulated for creatives, we're not going to support any AI art on here. So I'm getting on that, and I've got a website, and I do have a Patreon, but I've got to restructure it. So eventually
to get more money.
And then when I become wealthy enough, I'll become corrupt, and I'll use AI and abuse the system.
And never say that it's AI.
That's right. And just say like, no, I
did that.
Please.
I made them have 6 fingers.
Their thumb is coming out of their palm. Yeah. And I'm gonna make another animation of Will Smith eating spaghetti. And it's going to look even better than the one you just saw. Did you ever see that?
No.
Boy, oh boy. There's also an animation of The Rock eating rocks.
He can kick rocks for all I care. Fuck that guy.
But yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you
everyone
so
check them out.
I had too much faith in the idea that it's like, oh, everybody younger than me is going to be even way more tech savvy than I will be.
No, they can't type.
They can't type.
They don't know how to type.
They barely know how to write.
Which is insane.
Or pronounce words.
Yeah.
I've seen some YouTubers who have a fairly sizable following and they cannot. I'm just like, you don't know that word? Yeah. I'm sorry if that sounds elitist, but I'm just like, dude,
no,
what?
I am fine sounding elitist when I say, please know grammar.
Yeah, just
please know what words mean.
It's like, this is a communication aspect.